The day began not with a bang, but with the quiet, profound breath of the savanna at dawn. A cool, deceptive air hung over the dusty landscape, a temporary respite from the scorching heat to come. The first rays of sun, a soft apricot and rose gold, stretched long shadows across the red earth, highlighting the gnarled silhouettes of acacia trees. Juma, a figure of lean, wiry strength, moved through this awakening world with the practiced grace of a man who belonged to it. Yet every step he took felt heavy, not with the weight of the land, but with the weight of his father's legacy. His father, a ranger of legendary status, had patrolled these very same paths. His name was spoken with a mixture of respect and reverence by the local communities, and the animals he protected seemed to know his presence. He had been a guardian, a force of nature against the human greed that sought to plunder it. Now, his legacy rested on Juma's shoulders. Juma wore the uniform, carried the same binoculars, but he often felt like a boy playing dress-up, an imposter in his father's boots. The memory of the day his father was killed, a swift, brutal ambush by poachers, was a scar on Juma's soul, a constant, nagging reminder of the dangers lurking just beyond the golden grass. His mind drifted to Akina, not as the ferocious lioness she had become, but as the tiny, whimpering cub he had found, abandoned and starving. He had defied the protocol of his training, which dictated a detached, professional approach to all wildlife. Instead, he had taken her in, feeding her milk from a bottle, wrapping her in a warm cloth, and whispering promises of safety in her ear. He named her Akina, a word that meant strong in their local dialect, a name he hoped would become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Their bond had been a secret, a quiet rebellion against the rules. He had watched her grow, her small, trembling body transforming into a powerful, magnificent predator. When the time came to release her, he had done so with a heavy heart, watching her merge back into the wild, a piece of his own heart going with her. Now, she led her own pride, a magnificent symbol of life's resilience, and her existence was a deeply personal testament to Juma's quiet bravery. He was brought back to the present by the sudden, sharp crackle of his handheld radio. The voice that came through was not warm, but as dry and unyielding as the landscape around them. It belonged to Sergeant Elias, a man whose face was a roadmap of 1,000 hard-won battles. Elias believed in the rulebook, in the cold logic of their mission. He viewed Juma's sentimentality as a liability, a weakness that could get them all killed. "Juma, report," Elias's voice commanded. "All quiet, Sergeant. On my way back from the Mfupa sector now," Juma replied, his voice a little too quick, a little too eager to sound normal. He felt Elias's unspoken disapproval even over the airwaves, but as he made his way back along the winding track, a strange stillness descended upon the bush. The chattering of weavers and the distant cry of a jackal had fallen silent. It was the kind of silence that a man of the bush learns to fear. Juma's senses, finely tuned by years of watching and learning, went on high alert. He stopped, holding his breath, and knelt down. He swept his gaze over the ground, looking for something out of place. And there it was, fresh tracks. They were not the faint, delicate imprints of a gazelle or the heavy, telltale markings of an elephant. These were human footprints, but unlike the sandals or bare feet of local herders, these were the deep, distinct treads of heavy combat boots. He followed them for a few meters, his heart beginning to pound a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The tracks led away from the village paths, cutting directly towards the rocky outcrop of the northern kopjes, the exact area where Akina and her pride had been sighted yesterday. A chill of dread, colder than the morning air, washed over him. These were not innocent tracks. These were the marks of those who came to harm, to steal, to kill, the weight of his father's legacy. The love he felt for Akina and the cold, unyielding reality of his job all converged in that single, terrible moment. He felt the familiar knot of anxiety twist in his stomach. But this time, something else was there too. A resolve, hard and sharp. He knew he couldn't wait. He knew he had to act. He keyed his radio, his voice no longer tentative, but laced with a new urgency. "Sergeant, I found signs, suspicious activity near the northern Poachers. Heading to investigate over." The sun, now a brazen disk in the sky, beat down on the parched earth, baking the air and the stones until they shimmered. Juma's shirt was plastered to his back with sweat, but he ignored the discomfort. His focus razor-sharp. He pushed through a thicket of thorn bushes, their cruel spikes tearing at his trousers and leaving a line of stinging scratches on his arms. The tracks he was following were unmistakable now. He saw where a careless foot had scuffed the sand, and a moment later he spotted a discarded cigarette butt, a foreign object in the pristine wilderness. They were close. Too close. He tried again to reach Elias on the radio, his thumb pressing down on the transmit button with desperate hope. All he got in return was a hollow crackle of static, a mocking reminder of his isolation. The radio was dead, or at least out of range. He was truly on his own now, a solitary figure against a determined armed group. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. He was no longer bound by Elias's cautious commands or his cold logic. He was free to follow his gut, his intuition, the same instincts that had saved Akina all those years ago. The Poachers loomed before him, their jumbled masses of granite and basalt, creating a fortress of rock and shadow. This was where Akina often took refuge, a natural castle where her cubs could play and hide from the harsh sun. The memory of her as a cub, her tiny paws struggling on these very rocks, fueled his stride. He remembered Elias's harsh words. "We are not zookeepers, Juma. We are protectors of the reserve. Don't let one animal cloud your judgment." Elias believed that every lion was a statistic, every poacher a line item in a report. But for Juma, Akina was not a statistic. She was a living, breathing connection to his past, a testament to his love for this land and its creatures. The risk he was taking was personal. It was for her. Moving with a caution born of survival, he approached the base of the kopje. The air had a strange, heavy quality to it. The typical sounds of the bush were muted. No lizards scurried across the hot stones. No birds called from the tops of the acacia. It was a suffocating, unnatural silence. He scaled a small ridge, peering over a cluster of boulders. And then he saw it, a battered green Land Cruiser, its tires caked with mud and dust, was parked discreetly behind a large rock formation. He saw the gleam of metal, the distinct, menacing shape of a rifle propped against a tire. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, desperate drumbeat. He raised his binoculars, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He counted 4 men. Their faces were grim, their movements purposeful. They were not tourists, not researchers. They were predators, hunting not for survival, but for profit. He saw one man setting up a snare, a cruel, vicious loop of wire designed to incapacitate its prey. He scanned the area around them, searching for any sign of Akina. He found her finally near the mouth of a small, sheltered cave. She was not resting peacefully. Her magnificent body was taut with tension, her head held low, a low growl rumbling in her chest. Her cubs, small and oblivious to the true nature of the threat, tumbled and played behind her, their innocent antics in stark contrast to the danger that was closing in around them. Akina's eyes, a fierce golden yellow, were fixed on the men, a silent, deadly promise of violence. Juma felt a profound surge of emotion, a cocktail of fear, anger, and a deep, protective love. He knew he had to act. He was not a soldier, not a superhero. He was just a young ranger with a radio that didn't work and a desperate love for a lioness he had raised. Elias's words about sentimentality being a weakness echoed in his mind, but Juma finally understood. This wasn't a weakness, it was a strength. It was what made him different from the men with the rifles. It was what gave him the courage to stand his ground. He knew what he had to do. The heat was relentless, but Juma didn't feel it. His mind was a whirlwind of calculations, his body a coiled spring of tension. The poachers were closing in, fanning out in a half-circle, their rifles at the ready. They were methodically herding the lion family towards the snare, a sinister trap set with a calculated cruelty. Akina, sensing the trap but unable to see its full extent, was a furious ball of nerves. She roared, a sound that should have struck fear into any man, but these men were hardened, their faces impassive. They were driven by the promise of ivory and skin, a profit motive that eclipsed all fear. Juma knew he couldn't wait for a miraculous rescue. He was the only chance Akina and her cubs had. He took a long, sweeping look around, his gaze landing on a large pile of loose, jagged rocks a short distance above the poacher's position. A risky idea formed in his mind, a reckless, desperate gamble. He began to climb the steep, crumbling slope, his movements silent and deliberate. He used every handhold, every foothold he could find, his calloused fingers gripping the sharp edges of the stone. His heart was a drum against his ribs, a frantic rhythm of fear and determination. He could feel the poachers' presence below him, their low conspiratorial murmurs carrying on the still air. Reaching the top, he found a precarious perch behind a large boulder. From here, he could see everything. The poachers were now just a few dozen meters from Akina's cave, their faces a mask of cruel anticipation. He took a moment, steeling his nerves, and then, with all his strength, he pushed. A torrent of loose stones, some as small as his fist, others as large as his head, broke free. They crashed and rumbled down the slope, a deafening avalanche of rock and dust that tore through the quiet afternoon. The poachers, completely unprepared for the sudden, violent disturbance, were thrown into chaos. Their heads snapped up in alarm, their hands fumbling with their rifles. The sound was an earthquake, a force of nature they had not anticipated. In the midst of their panicked confusion, Juma shouted, his voice a raw, defiant cry that echoed across the savannah. "Hey, leave them alone!" He knew he was exposed. He knew he had just become their primary target. But in that moment, he didn't care. He was no longer the scared, insecure boy. He was a guardian, a force of protection. The poachers turned as one, their eyes narrowing with cold fury. One of them, a bulky man with a long, angry scar on his cheek, raised his rifle and pointed it directly at Juma. But in that brief, tense moment of distraction, Akina seized her chance. The roar that tore from her chest was not just a threat, it was a battle cry. It was the sound of a mother defending her young, of a predator asserting her dominion. She charged out of the cave, her teeth bared, her powerful legs eating up the ground. Her cubs, now terrified, scurried back into the dark safety of the cave. A tense and deadly standoff ensued. The poachers, caught between the defiant ranger on the cliff and the enraged lioness on the ground, were momentarily frozen. Juma stood his ground, his hands empty, but his gaze unwavering. He had done all he could. The rest was up to Akina and to fate. What will happen in this desperate confrontation? Will Juma's courageous gamble pay off, or has he sealed his own fate? The lives of a lion family hang in the balance, and Juma is at the center of it all. If you're captivated by Juma's heroic actions and want to discover how this perilous situation unfolds, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss the next chapter of this thrilling and fictional story.